First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here, to be surrounded by so many people and so many nice talks and different viewpoints. Speaking about Rome, speaking about the translation could be space. An aspect of space, what fascinates me is the aspect of the boundary. The aspect of the boundary by probably making a house, or by making a house, and in fact the square meters are not the limits of the inner space but the limits of the outside walls around it, or how you take away a piece of a floor to bring very deep into the house, from the backside to the front of this simple row house. The light, you still feel this, although the really square meter space is incredibly reduced, you have a complete other perception. Or how an enclosure of space on one hand is again open, let's say, by the Baroque technique of using the mirror. On the right hand, otherwise you probably never discover. How the perception of space in this shop in Antwerp is again not about square meters. But space could be is also in my fascination about proportions. How by taking away a floor, the lowest space, the cellar of this building is all of a sudden immediately the biggest one, the tallest one, the most important one. Or how the demand of making connection between the kitchen, who is in this kind, a gallery who wanted to present also work in the kitchen, but on the other hand wanted to keep still the kitchen related, or still independent, let's say, instead of only the relation, keeping the kitchen as a function, doing this cutting, bringing relations. It's about making those relations, or how proportions, by making a connection between spaces, are not defined by a shape before, but the consequence of the way you make things. This tube has the consequence of its shape, or this connection, or this space between two spaces is in fact because of the way you produce that material. But space is probably, in my perception, the most interesting one, the use of the space, how you really deal with the use of the space, making this elderly house, but in fact starting with the smallest room, starting with the people who are living there, and then making this kind of double orientation, although you have to spend only a few square meters, but still having in that one space two angles, two orientations, two ways to bring in light, and making a deep place where people can place their favorite pictures, or sitting in the corner to see how the children comes that weekend over. And that way of using the space brings me to the project I wanted to present. It's the project Paddenbroek in Hoik, a small village, let's say 20 kilometers outside of Brussels. It was a competition where you only have to handle in a kind of vision, a kind of attitude. And that's probably the lucky thing, that it makes it possible that it could look like this, because you need a talk with the client in competitions, and this is something sometimes lacking. But this competition was with the viewpoint. We started with this small farm, this small agriculture building, on one hand a house, an extension of a house. And it's in fact a nature educative center where children come over from Brussels to learn that apples hang on a tree and not only coming in a shop in a box. So, and they started over there, and for so many more, let's say, functions, it could function. And that's one of the functions. There is a guide starting there, a kind of guiding tour in the neighborhood. And this is the starting building. There was almost no budget. That's one quite interesting point. So you have the main house, the front, and how it always happens in Belgium. They started with a house and they add a next building, but there is always less money the next step, and so on. So till the last building is almost no quality anymore. This is how we started, and this is what the project is about. The competition, I mentioned one thing in the competition that I say I only want to do this project if you can add in the team an engineer who is not dealing with sustainable technical solutions, but who is dealing with sustainable solutions within the design process. Not as a kind of solution afterwards, but as a kind of technology to help to design, let's say, to make a very sensible project. I was incredibly lucky that the village or the mayor accepted this idea to even bring the budget higher of my commission by adding this team. And I think that's also one of my fascinations. So another element is that they had in mind to build a new building, because the quality of most of the buildings was not of a good quality. That's true, but the budget was quite low, and by going on with the building itself, we could make so much more square meters or so much more potential for even unknown program of today. It's a nature educative center, so you wanted to give opportunities to have meetings there. And another important element is that those children who eat there at noon, their sandwich, they don't want to sit in a heated space. They only did not want it to sit outside when it's raining or when it's incredibly cold. So normally they are going inside in one of these last extensions without any kind of relation with its context. So creating, let's say, a shelter for all those functions with clearly limits, of course. When it's incredibly cold, you cannot do everything in that space, but it makes it an opportunity. So the only maybe 30% of the project needs insulated buildings, the offices, a meeting room, and the cafeteria. So the shelter is in fact this first layer, a model to explain during the process of the project, and taking away the last non-interesting buildings. Starting with the demolition, because the last buildings were not the most interesting. Going on with the demolition, keeping sometimes the back wall as a kind of boundary, or as a kind of boundary to make, for example, the terrace for the cafeteria. Adding that first shelter. Coming to that plan, and then you see here, this is insulated, this is insulated, and this is insulated. Sorry, I can point, I guess. Yeah, this is insulated space, the offices on the ground floor level, the cafeteria, and they once started yet with making sanitary. I continued because the limit of the budget was so tight, and on the other hand, there was nothing wrong with the position of that function. On the first level, by discovering We made, let's say, an extra surface, an extra space where no one asked for, but that you can use for many things. For example, the opening happened of this project over there. There are exhibitions. So it's the idea that really you can give so much more. I don't gonna say square meters, I will say opportunities. I think that's the importance. And this meeting room, who was on the ground floor level before in the house itself, without any context, without any relation with its context, now on the first floor to have the relation with its context. Because it's a nature educative center, you really sit in this incredibly fascinating landscape. So it's the idea to really benefit of that, or to bring you in relation with that. The entrance, it could be very unclear if you don't mark it. Bringing the different levels on the same height to make it simple that we can have one stair without any elevator, but having the possibility to bring disabled people up. If you need an elevator, it's quite complex to do. The heating system in a water tank, the view on the existing space where you can make bread. There is this lime oven existing. And the other nice thing about that aspect is that you also, of course, you can rebuild this space completely. So now we restored that one, but we did not have to rebuild it. And you take a layer of history with you by doing that. By remaking a new building, you fade out this full history and have only the money to make 1/3 of this building what we could manage today. This was in fact the living space. It's disconnected by that wall, immediately closing it off with a kind of cupboard system. The 4 meeting rooms, or the 3, let's say, office spaces with 1 kitchenette, making a new insulation layer around the house itself, making relations not anymore on the same place necessary, still making this association, the different spaces, the existing floor as the casting for a new concrete floor for the meeting room, the cafeteria, and the spaces in between. And sometimes we had to insulate, sometimes not, because the shelter is nothing to do with any kind of insulation. The nice thing with the engineers was also that we came to a system that on top of it you open at night, and there are sliding doors on the ground floor open to ventilate completely at night. Because of the massivity in the building, we can cool it without any technique at all. Another aspect is that the perception of space is incredibly important. If there is full daylight, you accept another temperature than without. So that was also, having this kind of talks with the engineer was incredibly interesting to do. The space in between and this extra space with the relation with its outside. The maximum space no one ever could expect in that building. South completely closed in the roof, north the front facade completely open. And then of course, why not as an architect dealing with the existing and reacting on the existing? On one hand, having a new solution, founding a new solution for this balustrades, because there was meant in the design process something else, and then founding as an architect also the pleasure to reinforce the stability by doing this. And maybe simple elements in architecture like this kind of curve. Kids could play football here, and otherwise something can happen if you hit it. going on the other side, on the meeting room above the office spaces, and immediately the relation with the existing, but also a walk around it. I closed the windows who were not anymore necessary, and this relation with its landscape around it. A walk around the building. The definition of space is here not anymore the boundary. It's really how you, those kind of potentials of possible ways of using. I was there once for a guiding, and all of a sudden at 2 o'clock, 15 dogs of one kind of type of dog passed completely through the building from the front door to the back space to have a drink. Fantastic. I mean, I could not expect all kind of use, and I hope I could not expect. This is the oven, the backside, the boundary of what was before as a kind of definition also of the non-defined space. Walk around. And it's about that, the simple use of a building. How you can give an exercise on one day, having their group to learn to make bread. And I wanted to stop with that. I would like the use of a space, the importance of the use of the space, I want to add it with a building of the 60s, 70s. It's about generosity in architecture. I think I want to make a kind of attitude or a kind of proposal to bring generosity in our architecture. I don't know if you hear any sound. The noise is also important. It's a cultural center just outside of Brussels. See how the water, when it rains, comes completely in the building itself. And this space is filled with water. Children can, or adults, can walk around in it. There are theater spaces, there are places where kids can come over. And look how this space, for example, this door that you saw, and you will see it immediately back. This door is, I think, 81 meter high. It's only made for children. Children can go in, adults has to stay out. I really believe in the generosity of our architecture that we have to make. That's why I believe in the use of this project of Paddenbroek. I don't know what could happen. And of course, if you design a house, you probably make it completely different. The architecture will be completely different. But as a kind of public building, I believe this is a good example. It's not from me. Children can have classes for drawing or whatever making. There are some associations with the building we are in. I'm very sure this space was not in the program of the brief of that project. Thank you so much.